On a dark October evening in 1962, 4 submarines embarked on a secret mission that came perilously close to igniting World War III. Unbeknownst to the Americans, each submarine carried a nuclear-tipped torpedo, and in a little-known confrontation during the most tense days of the Cuban Missile Crisis, the fate of the world sat on the shoulders of a few sailors in the Sargasso Sea. While the Cuban Missile Crisis is one of the most studied conflicts of our time, newly declassified documents from both the Soviet and U.S. archives continue to shape our understanding of this major turning point in world history. The lessons learned from this underwater saga and the actions world leaders took during the crisis changed our view of how to conduct diplomacy in the age of thermonuclear war. During the height of the arms race between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev launched Operation Anadyr in August 1962. It was a secret mission to construct a major military base in Cuba. As part of this buildup, the Soviets planned to send the 69th Torpedo Submarine Brigade, consisting of 4 diesel-electric Foxtrot-class submarines led by highly experienced commanding officers. Each Foxtrot loaded a nuclear torpedo for the first time. Commanders later reported that they were not given specific instructions for when to use it. Captain Nikolai Shumkov only remembers being told is, if they slap you on the left cheek, do not let them slap you on the right.
Submarines cannot not communicate with their headquarters, so they have to make decisions on their own.
The submarines left Sierra Bay at midnight on October 1st. Once out to sea, they opened their secret orders, traveled to Cuba without detection, and docked in Mariel. The weapons on board, including 22 torpedoes, should be in a state of readiness. Across the Atlantic Ocean, the Americans were watching Cuba with growing apprehension. Preparations were being put in place for a major military action. The U.S. increased surveillance around Cuba to track the increasing Soviet buildup. Once the Foxtrots reached the Sargasso Sea, the crew learned that diesel submarines were not equipped for the tropical waters. As the water temperature increased, the poor ventilation systems caused the humidity and temperatures to rise. Temperatures ranged from 105 to 140 degrees. Severe heat rashes were common among the crew. In a letter to his wife, one sailor wrote, "My head is bursting from the stuffy air. Today 3 sailors fainted from overheating again." The Foxtrots had to surface to charge their batteries or to communicate with Moscow, making it easier for anti-submarine aircraft to detect them. The worst fear of the captains was being brought to the surface by the enemy. On October 14th, a U-2 aircraft flying over Cuba took pictures of Soviet missile sites for the first time. The CIA's National Photographic Interpretation Center confirmed the images.
SS-5 intermediate range ballistic missile under construction. This is a major find because this missile can fire a 2,200-mile missile and bring every target in the United States under.
These missiles were as powerful as the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. President Kennedy quickly established the Executive Committee of the National Security Council, or EXCOM. After careful examination for nearly a week, President Kennedy alerted the world.
To halt this offensive buildup, a strict quarantine on all offensive military equipment under shipment to Cuba is being initiated. It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union.
On October 22nd, CIA Director John McCone informed President Kennedy that 4 Soviet submarines were positioned to reach Cuba in 1 week. Concerned that the submarines would cross the quarantine line, the U.S. constructed surfacing rules and notified Moscow. Any submarines detected in the quarantine area would be signaled by explosive charges, alerting them to surface. Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy later recalled that the moments when they discussed the signaling of the submarines were the time of greatest worry for the president. On October 25th, 350 miles southwest of Bermuda, submarine B-59 was charging on the surface when it was sighted by a land-based patrol aircraft. B-59 committed a crash dive without its full charge. The USS Randolph and 8 destroyers were quickly in pursuit. On October 27th, the most intense day of the Cuban Missile Crisis, with escalating tensions on both sides, the most dangerous encounter between the Soviet and American navies occurred. Just hours after a U-2 spy plane was shot down over Cuba and the Americans were intensifying their threats to invade the island, the Randolph relocated B-59 and began efforts to surface the submarine. Unable to charge its batteries or communicate with Moscow for over 2 days, conditions on the sub were horrendous. Vladimir Orlov, a communications specialist, said men were falling like dominoes.
Americans are dropping these practice depth charges on them, which feel like, Orlov said, felt like being in an oil drum hit on the side with a sledgehammer. They're under attack. They've been cut off. When they were forced underwater, the last thing they heard from Miami radio stations was, we're on the verge of war.
Captain Valentin Savitsky concluded that the hail of explosions meant that war had begun. The totally fatigued captain became irate. He summoned the officer assigned to the nuclear torpedo and ordered it to be assembled to battle readiness. According to Orlov, Savitsky yelled, "Maybe the war has already started up there while we are doing somersaults here. We were going to blast them now. We will die, but we will sink them all. We will not become the shame of the fleet." Vasily Arkhipov, chief of staff of the brigade and an officer of equal rank, reigned in Captain Savitsky's wrath. According to Arkhipov's widow, Arkhipov, known for his calm temperament, had seen the power of nuclear weapons and was deeply affected by it. Together, the men decided that they could not risk starting a war and instead chose to surface to the awaiting enemy. The Americans only learned about the nuclear torpedoes in recent years. Many experts now believe if that Savitsky had launched the nuclear torpedo, World War III would have erupted.
Everything turned in the different direction, and military will be in charge, and military logic very different from the politicians. This, it will just begin the war escalation that I guess will be unstoppable.
We came closer to the brink than we even realized. The tense underwater conflict revealed the dangers of the existing approach to diplomacy in the age of nuclear weapons. The mistakes that occur on the battlefield in conventional warfare are unacceptable in nuclear warfare.
We didn't have any technical restraints on those nuclear weapons. One person could have launched, and that's horrifying.
After Kennedy's death, Jackie Kennedy wrote to Khrushchev, "The danger which troubled my husband was that war might be started not so much by the big men as by the little ones." Kennedy and Khrushchev recognized that continuing this brinkmanship would eventually lead to nuclear disaster. In a letter to Kennedy, Khrushchev warned, "A moment may come when the knot of war will be tied so tight that even he who tied it will not have the strength to untie it." While the actions of the men on the submarine averted nuclear war, the crisis also prompted an important turning point in Kennedy's foreign policy. Instead of continuing with hawkish bluster, Kennedy laid out a new approach to peace and disarmament.
I realize the pursuit of peace is not as dramatic as the pursuit of war, and frequently the words of the pursuers fall on deaf ears, but we have no more urgent task.
From this point on, instead of just investing blindly into the arms race, the two sides began to negotiate.
They negotiated on banning nuclear tests and established a hotline between the Kremlin and the White House.
That you have negotiated with your enemy, not with your friend. Khrushchev and Kennedy did it.
Leaders from Reagan and Gorbachev to Obama have negotiated to cut back on the presence of nuclear weapons. While generations have grown up with the fear of nuclear annihilation, the US and Soviet Union never again came this close to the brink.
Specifically, the Cuban Missile Crisis was a lesson to all of us that we have to be very careful in a world with nuclear arsenals. Because if someone makes a wrong decision, or makes a mistake, or gets jittery and presses the button too soon, it could be the end of humanity.